Buongiorno.
Buongiorno.
I'm Mary Watt. I'm a professor of Italian studies at the University of Florida. I've spent most of my academic life studying and teaching the Divine Comedy and other pieces of literature from the Italian Medioevo and the Rinascimento. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about a world turned upside down and inside out. And the canto that we're going to talk about today is a perfect example of this. And I am so pleased to be here with my wonderful colleague, Maggie Fritz-Morkin. Hello again.
Hello, nice to see you again, Mary. I am Maggie Fritz-Morkin, and I teach medieval Italian literature at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I previously taught at Sewanee, the University of the South, and like Mary, I've spent a lot of time with Dante and also Petrarch and Boccaccio, the Tre Corone of Italian literature. And some of my research interests include obscenity and authorship. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about what is obscenity, how is it how does it manifest in medieval literature? How is it defined? And then I also think about how authors use obscenity to kind of shore up their legacy and their who they are as an author, how they transgress limits. So, of course, this canto is very interesting for reasons that we'll get to in terms of obscenity. And a new project for me is something thinking about Dante's sort of categorization of fraud. When I first read the Divine Comedy, I thought, gosh, what a pedant, this guy with his 14 categories and even more subcategories of fraud. But now, something about the last few years, I've become much more convinced that like Dante, we need to have clear kind of categories about how we think about fraud and lying and deceit. This canto is also interesting from a fraud perspective because here we are in the middle of Dante's treatment of fraud.
Well, and of course, we're talking about Inferno 21, Canto the Malebolge, or the evil clause. And one of the things that you and I have talked about offline as well is in addition to fraud, which is, deception and not being able to see the truth, something that you pointed out when we were chatting about this was how much this canto is characterized as well by an inability of physical sight, possibly as an avatar of spiritual sight, inability of sight to penetrate that which lies below, right? There's a darkness to this. In fact, Dante talks about it as, marvelously dark, etc. So the thickness is inability to see, to understand, to penetrate to where the truth is and what lies below. And I think this is, there's a lot of carnivalesque to this canto. There's a lot of obscenity to it, but it has an interesting place in terms of the autobiographical aspects of Dante's own quest to see, right, which is set off by Santa Lucia in the first place. So this darkness, the fraud, the deception, pulling the wool over one's eyes. And then there are these personal aspects that we see in here. Of course, we're talking about barragers, and this is what Dante himself has been accused of. So there's a richness here that is really, really, really significant. This canto, I wouldn't say it's underserved or understudied, but I think it deserves even more inspection. That's my sense, and exploration. So we are in the 8th circle of hell, right?
It's a big circle. Got a lot of subdivisions. We're about halfway through, right? This is the fifth circle. I thought this one was really funny. I mean, we sort of started talking about this kind of project together, thinking about the carnivalesque and satire. And, one thing that catches my attention in this canto is how much dialogue there is. We've got these little black devils who are antagonizing. We've got this whole brigade of them. They're antagonizing Virgil and then Dante, a lot of back and forth. They're sort of play acting a little bit. Mm-hmm. What first drew you to this canto?
Well, Constantine. Dante's preoccupation with the donation of Constantine, and I started thinking about how Dante later on blames Constantine for having made himself Greek and this turning away and showing someone they spotted. And so this backwardsness, this turning, and that's in the context of some other work I've been doing on the age of exploration and direction and deictics in the Commedia. But the more I looked at Constantine, and then there's what I've called geographical sodomy. I go back to the circle of sodomites and the last image of the buttocks, and then there are a lot of glutes and buttocks in this canto, and so I sort of started to look at this, and of course there's really, really an obsession with the hindquarters in this canto. They're always giving it to someone in the rump, and there's the obscenity of it. And years and years and years ago, I had a wonderful opportunity to get up on the scaffolds when they were redoing or refurbishing Giotto's Last Judgment in the Scrovegni chapel. Mm-hmm. And of course, Dante was in Padua at the time that Giotto was doing this. And so a lot of the images of the damned in the Scrovegni chapel have this kind of obsession with the hindquarters, the visuals of this. And so I was struck by how Dante, first of all, seems to do in words what Giotto is doing visually, but also this continual turning, right, which is the whole idea of conversion, and that's turning the right way as opposed to turning the wrong way. So the more I looked at this canto, I started to realize that this is a theme we see quite frequently, where this obsession with that which is backwards. And you see how many times, even when Dante makes it to the top of purgatory, he turns again. So turning becomes part of this. And so, you and I both worked with Fabian Alfi on the idea of satire and inversion and perversion. And so the whole idea in the topsy-turvy world is upside down, inside out, etc. And then using items in a way that they're not ordinarily used, right? And so that last line, he made a trumpet out of his ass, is the complete embodiment of using items or inserting items or visually, when they ought not to be.
Right. It's like a perfect emblem of the Carnivalesque, which we've sort of talked about a little bit too. Right.
And the noise, right? Yeah, the noise.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have your students do something with this, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I haven't actually gotten any student yet to kind of answer that last gesture, but I think, sort of having beginning students who may not be specialized in literature, it's kind of a gen ed course, one of the tactics to kind of get into comedy, right? This is a canto about comedy. It says so in the first line, right? This is my comedy, or in the second line, getting students to realize what's funny about this. And it's kind of comic and funny even before we get to that last kind of inversion that makes a trumpet of the little devil's ass. There's a lot of back and forth, and I think kind of getting students to perform the parts of the devils who are saying, so Virgil kind of announces, we can come through here. We've got the okay. It's ordained on high. We're safe and protected. And then the devil kind of droops his shoulders and says, "Oh, we can't attack him now." And students don't always hear that kind of irony and the sarcasm in the devil's voice. So I think doing this exercise where you actually have them try out different affects as they read through the dialogue, because it's dialogue, it reads almost like a script, I think is a really interesting way to kind of get into thinking about what comedy is. Is it the comedy of the stage, right? Is that what's going on here? A little bit.
Right.
I also, thinking about comedy, this is one of the places where we talk about comedy. It's only the second time that Dante mentions that the book he's writing is a comedy. Right. And what I love about the beginning of this canto is it starts by saying that there are some things that don't belong in a comedy at all. He says, so we went from bridge to bridge, speaking of other things that my comedy does not record. So what are those things? There are some things that just don't belong in a comedy, but not farts.
But what are they?
Right?
Yeah.
So I think this is this whole canto is a little bit of a commentary on what belongs in a comedy and what doesn't.
No, I think that's right. And I've often wondered, what is it that wasn't said here. And so we're also acutely aware of the editing process, right? And Dante's attention to the writing project, because we know from Paradiso that he has been sent back in order to write this. And this is not unlike what we saw in the Vita Nuova, right? Where he said, well, I'm not going to write everything, but, the important stuff. Right. And so that is kind of an interesting thing that makes us think, what's missing here? But it also tunes us in to the editing aspect, where Dante goes back and you can almost picture him, okay, that doesn't belong here, that doesn't belong to Commedia. So should I put this in? Should I put that out? And the care that is taken, and my students often look at this, the structural care, that this thing is construction. Significantly, what we see in the physicality of this canto is broken construction, right? The broken bridges.
Absolutely.
And so this is again that sort of anti good writing project. The construction here is all hard.
And we see it sort of embodied in Virgil, right? Virgil sort of no longer recognizes the landscape. These bridges were up and now they've crumbled. And so we think, it's just one canto ago that Virgil was talking about his high tragedy, but the rules don't quite apply here anymore. He doesn't recognize the landscape, and he doesn't recognize the risk of like dealing with these barrators, or dealing with the devils who are punishing barratry and kind of engaging in it too. Another thing that kind of sneaks into this canto is a good bit of autobiography. There's this throwaway line that Voice of the Poet gives us, like, it's they kind of reminded me of the people who are coming out, who were captured at Caprona.
Right, and right. The safe conduct, right? Yeah.
Safe conduct, right? This passage of safe conduct. And we don't hear too many episodes. I think this is the only reference to Dante's military service. Is that right?
I think that, there are indications in throughout, sort of little allusions where Dante is like, I know the military jargon here. And, there's, of course, the reference in the description of the Arbia running red, but this one is where he specifically says, I felt the same way here, right? It is very autobiographical, and so this is kind of a PTSD moment for him.
Absolutely,
he has suffered traumas. His Beatrice is dead, Guido's dead, he's being exiled. Clearly he remembers this moment. And so I think that's kind of almost touching. And then this comes out, and my God, this sort of infernal landscape. I think it was Sando Burke, if I got that right, the modern images of media. This is this destroyed urban landscape, destruction as opposed to construction. And so I think this is one of those moments where Dante is really, you said it's autobiographical. He's looking at, how do I write this? How do I just, oh my gosh, I've just reliving the horror, reliving the terror. And these are supposed to be the policemen, right? These are
very strange. I had the kind of good fortune, or it was a kind of a remarkable coincidence, to teach this with a group of undergrads right at a moment when the DACA legislation was being kind of revisited and possibly canceled. And so the students we were talking about how it's really the same thing, people being asked to come forward and be incredibly vulnerable and, lay themselves open to attack or deportation, and how risky it feels to trust somebody who you don't trust to have your safety at heart. Okay? And
you and I talked about this offline. The satirization of the military that we see here, and then so Dante's own moment links us right up to what is the military? How is the military behaving in his time? How's the military? How are policing forces dealing in our time? How do governments and even barratry? There's corruption within the government, right? So this is it's parody at its finest, where parody is used to effect social criticism.
Absolutely, and I think these devils are patent sadists, right? They enjoy the torture. Is that a commentary on the kind of people who enjoy warfare, or is it a commentary on people, or is it a topsy-turvy inversion?
Well, and I don't know that has to be one or the other, right? I mean, I think they can flow into each other. It's commentary. It's very obviously personal commentary. And even, I mean, you talk about, the sadism of this, where the contrapasso is, these people jump up and they get poked down with this is the infernal game of Marco Polo, right? Marco down with these boards into this burning pitch, and this is, I think, one of those images that really informs how we see hell, right? I mean, I often talked about how Dante really gives a face to hell and for the Western world. But this is it, these devils running around, but they're almost comical. And we will see a sort of very similar inversion when we have the canto of Guido da Montefeltro, where there's that little tiny moment at the end of it where St. Francis's angels are bringing him up into heaven, and then the black cherub pulls him down. So we have this reprise of the realization that these devils exist throughout hell, right? And the constant imagery of, you may think you are safe, right? This is Guido da Montefeltro, but you're not. And similarly, Dante has introduced us to this in this canto. You may think you have safe conduct, and clearly there are many examples in medieval literature and history where people who thought they were safe were not. And I mean, in the Song of the Nibelungs, they're all burnt to death in a dining hall, in an act. This is not an uncommon theme. And clearly that's something that Dante is reprising here and later on in Canto 27.
You mentioned earlier, and we were talking about this offline too, this idea of kind of not being able to see beneath the surface of the pitch. Nothing is what it seems, is kind of how fraud sort of presents one surface and has a different truth underneath. And I think that, one interesting kind of thing about this canto is that it has this echo in Paradiso, where Dante is, he's questioning, why is Ripheus, the pagan, why is Ripheus the pagan in Paradiso? How can this be? And it's in Canto 20, so like a near parallel, right? It almost seems like an intentional echo. And Dante uses that same image of being able to see the surface, but not being able to penetrate with your eyes the profundity of divine justice. So from where you sit, you can't see beneath the surface. And who are you to question divine justice?
Right.
It's hard to reconcile with this kind of treatment of fraud, where we absolutely need to think about what's beneath the surface and get to the bottom of things, right?
No, I think that's the key. And he talks about it being marvelously obscure, mirabilmente oscura, and of course reprising his initial state of bewilderment in Canto of the Inferno.
It's like an echo of the kind of miracle plays too, where these kind of diabolical figures come from. Like these are moments when we see the miraculous, or we see.
Yeah, the theatricality of this is echoed throughout that. You are not going to believe this, but we have 1 minute and 40 seconds left.
We can talk about
parting words. Parting words. Any last comments?
Parting words.
Trombetta.
The trombetta. I think Valerie Allen, who is a fart scholar, mostly studying the Anglophone context, she reads this canto beautifully and just kind of notes how that cul fatto trombetta, the ass made into a trumpet, just kind of stops the action. It's this, and she says it's like this there's no consolation of philosophy after this klaxon. Just stops the action.
Curtain drop, mic drop, we're done. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me.
Thank you. I have really enjoyed
putting this project together. So I wish you well for the start of the season, the new academic year.
Thank you.
Just for the sake of dating ourselves here, this is August 2020, right in the middle of a pandemic. And hopefully we can bring some consolation to people who want to explore Dante a little further. So I am going to stop the recording now and thank my lucky stars that I have such wonderful colleagues and the opportunity to spend time with you. And we'll return the circle of the what did you call them? The circle of the glutes. Let's just call it that. All right, we'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.